This story is about a black Air Force lieutenant colonel who was handcuffed in a Pentagon parking garage, not for what he did, but for how he looked. But what happened next didn't just expose racial profiling. It exposed how silence power and regret collide when the wrong people are given the right to decide who belongs. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It watches and waits. The rain was falling in fine cold threads as Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Ward stepped out of the Pentagon Annex building. His coat collar turned up, his mind still echoing with the details of the cyber defense strategy meeting he'd just led. The garage across Clarendon Boulevard was nearly empty, just the hum of ventilation, flickering fluorescent lights, and the smell of wet concrete. Elijah wasn't in uniform anymore. After the briefing, he'd changed into a dark hoodie and gray tactical pants. He didn't need attention. He just needed to get to his black SUV, make a secure call, and go home. He didn't hear the footsteps until the voice came hard from behind. "Hands, where I can see them." He turned slowly, instinct honed from years in war zones, not to move too fast. Two officers, guns drawn, flashlights in his face. The taller one, broad-shouldered with a tight jaw and storm-colored eyes, barked, "Step away from the vehicle." The younger officer, clearly less sure of himself, stood back, adjusting his grip on his sidearm. Elijah raised his hands calmly. "Officers, I don't move," the tall one snapped again. "We got a call. Suspicious individual, male, hoodie, messing with vehicles. You match the description." Elijah's voice remained level. "I'm walking to my own car. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Ward, United States Air Force. I just left a secure briefing across the street." But there was no pause, no verification. The taller cop, Sergeant Rick Barnes, moved first. Rough, unapologetic. He grabbed Elijah's wrist and twisted it behind his back with practiced aggression. The younger one, Officer Evan Shaw, hovered with uncertainty. Elijah's military-issued laptop bag dropped to the ground. The corner clipped the concrete with a sharp sound. As Barnes pulled the other arm back and snapped on the cuffs Elijah's ID card, a silver Pentagon access badge slid out of his coat pocket and landed near Barnes's boot. Neither man looked down. Elijah winced slightly, but didn't resist. He rested his forehead against the cold concrete pillar beside his SUV. "Is this really happening?" he asked quietly, not to them, but to himself. "I'm not resisting," he said. "I'm unarmed. You need to verify my identity." Barnes scoffed. "Save it." And then Evan Shaw muttered, just under his breath, "People like you always think you can talk your way out of anything." That stopped Elijah. He turned his head slightly, eyes locked onto Shaw's. "What exactly do you mean by people like me?" Shaw didn't answer. Barnes began rifling through the laptop bag. "Encrypted device." "What is this?" "It's a secured military laptop," Elijah replied. "Barcode inside the flap. It's tagged." They didn't check. They just kept searching, kept assuming, kept treating him like the threat. And even then, Elijah didn't shout, didn't plead. Instead, with his wrists bound behind his back, he carefully turned his left wrist and pressed a small recessed button on the underside of his smartwatch. One vibration, two. A blinking green light. A silent signal had been sent. Coordinates ID situation code routed directly to the Joint Command Comms unit inside the Pentagon's secure channel. Someone was listening now. Elijah turned his head slightly and said, "You have less than 10 minutes to figure out who I am." Barnes narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Elijah replied. 10 minutes before this garage becomes very crowded. But Barnes didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. To understand how badly they were about to screw up, you'd have to understand who Elijah Ward really was. He wasn't just some officer with a shiny badge. He was the boy from the south side of Atlanta, raised by a firefighter father who once got tackled to the ground on their front lawn by cops responding to a false burglary call. Elijah had been 13. Watched it all from the window. The screams, the humiliation, the look in his mother's eyes when she opened the front door and shouted, "He lives here." That day never left him. He vowed never to be powerless again. He read the rule books, studied the systems, became the kind of man who didn't need to shout, because when he spoke, nations listened. By 38, he was briefing the National Security Council. By 45, he was on first-name terms with 2 secretaries of defense. And now, he was cuffed against a concrete pillar, treated like a nobody, just because of a hoodie, just because someone called the cops, and just because these 2 didn't bother to ask the right questions. He didn't panic. He calculated dispatch proximity, body cam angle, who was watching from the ceiling camera, how far backup was, whether Evan Shaw would crack before or after it was too late. The blinking light on his watch pulsed green again. They were coming. Elijah closed his eyes and breathed. Because this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake. A loud one. And someone was about to hear it. Officer Evan Shaw was still staring at the blinking green light on Elijah's wristwatch when the first wave of doubt hit him cold, sharp, and unrelenting. The older officer beside him, Sergeant Rick Barnes, was too deep into the rhythm of authority to notice. He had that look in his eye, the same one Evan had seen back during training when Barnes told him, "Confidence is control. Never second-guess yourself in the field." But Evan was second-guessing everything now. Elijah Ward hadn't moved, hadn't shouted, hadn't resisted. He stood cuffed, calm, quiet, and yet somehow more in control than either of them. Evan saw it now, and that made something tighten in his chest. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught it lying just inches from Barnes's boot. A silver ID card. It gleamed under the flickering parking garage lights, half submerged in a shallow puddle. U.S. AIR Force LTC, Elijah Ward, Pentagon, clearance level 5. Evan's breath caught. He'd seen badges like that before, but never out in the open, never this close, and never attached to a man being treated like a suspect. He swallowed hard and took a hesitant step forward. "Rick," he said, voice low, "you might want to see this." Barnes didn't look up. "Save it. I know how these guys play." Evan clenched his jaw. "No, I'm serious. I think we made what a mistake." Barnes snapped, finally turning to him. "Let me guess. The man in the hoodie with a government laptop and a fancy story you're buying." That Evan hesitated. The system alert came in. "Command side. Pentagon route." Barnes's face hardened. "You trust alerts more than your own eyes now." "No. But maybe we should pause. Maybe you should grow a spine." That stopped Evan cold. Barnes turned back to Elijah, now kneeling to unzip the laptop bag fully. "Let's see what secrets our friend here's carrying." But Elijah's voice cut through the tension, not raised, not threatening, just measured. "You've already violated 3 federal protocols: searching government equipment without cause, detaining a military officer without identity verification, and ignoring a federal alert." Barnes laughed without humor. "You sound like a damn lawyer." Elijah didn't smile. "No, just someone who's been through this before." And in that sentence, Evan heard it not just what was being said, but the weight behind it. Elijah had been through this before, and Evan had helped do it to him again. Something inside Evan cracked a little. It wasn't the threat of getting caught. It wasn't even fear of disciplinary review. It was the memory, distant but sharp, of watching his mother scream at officers outside their home when his cousin was tackled for walking home late in a hoodie. The confusion, the silence that followed, the words no one ever said out loud, but everyone felt. It's not about what you do. It's about what they think you are. And now, here he was, holding the cuffs, repeating the cycle. Evan's radio crackled, pulling him back. "Unit 7, stand by. Unmarked federal vehicles entering from south entrance. Be advised, VIP retrieval in progress." Barnes froze mid-search. Evan looked up. Headlights washed across the far end of the garage. 3 black SUVs rolled in, slow, deliberate. Men in suits, 2 in uniform, all moving with the precision that made Evan's stomach knot. The first man out flashed a badge before speaking. "Step away from the detainee. Now." It wasn't a request. Evan stepped back instinctively. Barnes didn't move. Elijah turned slightly, finally pulling his cheek from the cold pillar. "Took them long enough," he muttered. The lead agent, tall, calm, with eyes that missed nothing, walked straight to Elijah. "Lieutenant Colonel Ward." Elijah nodded once. "Are you injured?" "Not physically." Barnes stiffened. "Hey, wait a damn minute." The agent turned. "You are Sergeant Barnes." "Yeah. You're to remain here until Internal Affairs and Military Legal arrive. Both vehicles are recording. We have audio. We have body cam footage. We have the dispatch log." Barnes blinked. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Elijah said softly. "It's a pattern." The agent turned back to Evan. "And you?" Evan didn't answer. He just looked down, eyes flicking to the ID card, still lying untouched in the puddle. The silence hung thick. But Elijah didn't press it. He simply extended his wrists, and the agent unlocked the cuffs with swift efficiency. Evan saw the red welts. The way Elijah flexed his hands twice, pain without a sound. "You didn't resist," the agent said almost to himself. "I had nothing to prove," Elijah replied. The agent nodded. "We'll take it from here." As they escorted Elijah toward the SUV, Evan stood frozen. His hands felt too big, too clumsy. The badge on his chest felt like a lie. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. A protector, or just another uniform in the way. And as the black SUV pulled away, the question that hit hardest wasn't about what he had done. It was about whether he'd ever be able to undo it. Evan Shaw didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car long after his shift ended, parked in the far corner of a gas station lot, just off Wilson Boulevard, hands still clenched on the steering wheel, like he was waiting for someone to give him new orders. But no voice came through the radio. No one told him what to feel. The image wouldn't leave his head. Elijah's raw wrists, the look in his eyes when the cuffs came off, and the way he'd said, "I had nothing to prove." That line haunted him. Because somewhere deep down, Evan knew he had. He'd had something to prove to Barnes, to himself, that he could act like he belonged in uniform, that he could make decisions without flinching, that he could be strong. But strength wasn't what he'd shown back there. Not really. What he showed was obedience and silence. And now silence had teeth. When he got home, his wife was already asleep. He stood in the kitchen staring at the photo on the fridge, his academy graduation. His father's hand on his shoulder. His smile too wide to be honest. He had once believed the badge meant certainty, meant being part of something bigger than himself. Now, all he felt was small. He opened his department-issued tablet. Notifications exploded across the screen. Officer detains Pentagon official, Internal Affairs investigating. Lieutenant Colonel wrongfully cuffed near federal facility. And the one that made his chest cave in, video shows officers ignoring identification from black Air Force officer. He tapped the headline. The footage had been clipped, cropped, spliced for speed. But there he was, his own body cam, plain as day. Standing near Elijah, eyes on the ID card in the puddle, not picking it up, not saying a word. He shut the tablet. His hands were shaking. The department hadn't called yet. But they would. And when they did, what would he say? "I didn't know. I was just following protocol." Or worse, I was afraid of what Barnes would say if I stopped him. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? He wasn't afraid of Elijah. He was afraid of Barnes. Afraid of disappointing a man who barked orders and called fear weakness, who taught him that hesitation was the same as betrayal. But maybe the real betrayal was standing still. The next morning, Evan showed up early to the station. Barnes wasn't there. The lieutenant on duty said both of them had been pulled off rotation pending a formal review. Internal Affairs would be calling. Evan nodded, said nothing, went to his locker. Inside, tucked behind his spare gloves, was the copy of the department code of conduct he'd stuffed there months ago. He flipped through it absent-mindedly until a knock interrupted him. It was Officer Carla Mendez, Senior Patrol. No nonsense. The one who always showed up 5 minutes early and called everyone rookie, even if they weren't. She handed him a printed memo. "You're being called into a preliminary interview. Captain Delgado's heading it." Evan nodded again. "You okay, Shaw?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then whispered, "I think I froze." Carla didn't flinch. Everyone freezes. Question is, what you do after. He walked into the interview room 15 minutes later, fluorescent lights humming above a recorder, already blinking red on the desk. Captain Ivan Delgado didn't smile. She didn't scowl either. She just flipped open a thick file and said, "Do you want to explain why you ignored federal ID and command clearance?" Evan's mouth felt like paper. "I didn't mean to ignore it." She looked up sharply. "Didn't mean to, or didn't have the courage to stop your partner's silence." She waited. Evan stared down at his own hands. "I saw the ID," he said finally. "I read it. I knew what it was. But Barnes, he told me it was fake, that it was a trick. And you believed him." He nodded barely. "Why, I guess." He struggled. "Because I didn't want to believe I was part of something wrong. So I told myself we weren't." Delgado leaned back. Lieutenant Colonel Ward filed no formal complaint, no press conference, no lawsuit. But he sent us a 12-point internal review request with documented violations timestamps and cross-referenced clearance logs. Evan blinked. "She's not angry," Delgado added. "She's exact. She, Elijah Ward," Delgado said, "is a woman." You didn't notice Evan's heart stuttered. No, he hadn't. Barnes had said he and this guy so many times Evan had never stopped to see for himself. Not even when Elijah spoke. Not even when the cuffs clicked. And in that moment something shifted in his stomach, sharp and sick. He hadn't just misjudged Elijah's authority. He hadn't seen her at all. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends," Delgado said. "Are you going to be the kind of officer who hides behind someone like Barnes? Or are you ready to speak on record?" Outside the room, the station hallway was empty. Quiet. But deep down, Evan knew that hallway wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Because the system was moving now. And maybe he had one last chance to stop being a passenger. The question was, would he take it? Evan Shaw didn't answer right away. Captain Delgado waited, pen hovering just above her legal pad, the red light on the recorder still blinking steady as a heartbeat. Outside the door, the station remained silent. It was the kind of silence that demanded something be said, not to fill the space, but to stop pretending it was empty. Evan finally looked up. His voice was quiet. "I'll speak." Delgado didn't nod, didn't congratulate him. She just pressed her thumb to the recorder and said, "Proceed." And for the first time in over 36 hours, Evan told the truth. About how Sergeant Barnes never checked the ID. About how he kicked it further away. About the moment Elijah said she was a lieutenant colonel and how Barnes laughed. About the laptop being unzipped without gloves. About the radio ping alerting them to stop and how Barnes waved it off. Delgado didn't interrupt. When he finished, she simply said, "You'll need to make a formal statement, signed and notarized, and you should prepare for pushback." Evan nodded. "I know." But he didn't. Not really. Because less than 3 hours later, someone leaked the footage. It started as a 42-second clip on a small whistleblower account body cam footage, spliced with timestamps, showing a black officer calmly stating her name and rank, clearly identifying herself, and being ignored. Then, the story hit military Reddit forums. Then, a TikTok law account. And then, it blew up. By nightfall, the headline had spread across every major outlet. Pentagon-level officer cuffed by local cops. Video shows no resistance. They hadn't even gotten her pronouns right. Evan sat on the floor of his apartment that evening, knees pulled up to his chest phone, buzzing nonstop. His wife scrolled silently, mouth tight. "This is you?" she asked. He nodded. "You didn't even touch her," she added. "No," he whispered. "But I didn't stop the one who did." She didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she asked, "What's her name, Elijah Ward?" She didn't say anything after Evan shook his head. Not a word. Just walked away. But Elijah hadn't walked away from everything. Because while the press fought over exclusive interviews, she refused to give, while pundits raged about police training and federal authority. Elijah was doing something else. She was writing an internal petition, 12 points long, directed at the Department of Defense requesting an overhaul of how military identification is handled by civilian law enforcement, citing federal breach of conduct, listing failures of due process, attaching timestamps, photographs of her injuries, even a chain of custody request for every item Barnes had touched. It was surgical, impersonal, brutally effective. The document was leaked 2 days after the video, not by her, but by someone inside JAG. A war hero didn't raise her voice. She wrote the system a warning, and the system listened, because it had to. Back at the precinct, Sergeant Barnes was cracking. Not publicly, not yet, but in the corners and the whispers. Officers started stepping away from him in break rooms. Someone had taken down his Employee of the Month plaque. His locker was tagged with the word blind. And then there was the email. Anonymous. Sent from a ghosted account. Just one line checked the dashcam from June 14, 2017. Internal Affairs did. It showed Barnes years ago pulling over another black driver, a nurse late for her night shift. She had offered ID. He hadn't accepted it. He'd pushed her onto the hood of her car. No charges were filed. No report submitted. The footage had been buried. Until now. Barnes was called in. He didn't speak, just folded his arms. But what he didn't say said everything. Delgado watched him across the table and said, "There's a pattern here. It's not just what happened in the garage. It's who you are when no one's watching." Still, he didn't respond. So she laid a folder on the table. Inside were photos of Elijah's wrists, her badge, her access logs. Then she dropped the final item, a still frame from the overhead garage camera. It showed Barnes clearly, deliberately nudging the ID badge with the tip of his boot. He blinked. Just once. Delgado leaned in. "I want you to look me in the eye and tell me you didn't see it." He couldn't. Because he had. And now it was public. The footage had been aired across every evening news segment in the DMV area. Military leaders were issuing statements. Congressional representatives were tweeting condolences. Everyone wanted to condemn the act, just not the culture. And Elijah Shee hadn't said a word. No interviews, no op-eds. Just one email to Internal Affairs with a subject line that read, "This isn't about me. It's about how many people wouldn't have had the tools to prove it." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. Not because he was afraid of losing his job, but because he'd started wondering who leaked the video in the first place. No one had claimed credit. No one had access except for 2 federal agents, 2 precinct supervisors, and someone in the Pentagon chain. But the footage was out, and someone wanted it that way. Which meant someone was still watching. The question now was from where and for what purpose. The question haunted Evan like an itch beneath the skin. Who leaked the video? He couldn't shake it. Not during his forced administrative leave. Not while pacing the worn floorboards of his 1-bedroom apartment. And not even when he sat across from Captain Delgado, again answering questions about the timeline chain of custody radio logs and Barnes's behavior leading up to the incident. Delgado had theories, of course she did. She always did. "It wasn't you," she said bluntly, eyes flicking up from her notes. Evan shook his head. "No, I gave my statement. That's all." She nodded slowly, almost disappointed. The leak was calculated, clean. No metadata, no traceable headers. It came from inside, but not carelessly. "Then, who?" Evan asked. Delgado didn't answer. Instead, she slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a secure message that had come through the IA portal just that morning. The subject line read, "What Barnes did in 2017 is only the beginning. Check October 3rd, 2019. Parking garage. Same pattern. Different badge." Below that, a link to an encrypted drive. Evan didn't even need to ask. The pattern had been building long before Elijah Ward. And now, someone was feeding the system piece by piece, each clip, each timestamp, each wound made visible. But who Evan walked out of the precinct with that question still burning holes in his thoughts. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove toward the garage where it all started. Not because he expected answers, but because it was the only place where the noise in his head quieted, even if just a little. The third level looked exactly the same. Same flickering lights. Same faint stench of oil and concrete. Same cold echo. He stood by the pillar Elijah had been pinned against, running his hands slowly along the rough edge. And then, he noticed something taped just behind it, neatly hidden, barely visible. A USB drive. No label, no fingerprints. He took it without thinking, heart thudding in his throat, and drove straight to a small private workspace near Columbia Pike that he sometimes used for off-duty reports. Plugged it in. Waited. Only one file. Video. It opened on a dashboard camera view, Barnes again. A different day. Different suspect. Same tactics, same disregard, same disgust in his voice. At the end of the footage, a distorted voice, digitally modified genderless, spoke over black screen. "You think Elijah was the first? You think she'll be the last we've been watching? We have more." Then silence. No source, no signature, just a final message. Don't let them bury it again. Evan sat back in his chair, palms sweaty. Someone had chosen him, or maybe tested him. Either way, it wasn't over, not even close. And while the department scrambled to patch PR, and Barnes remained tight-lipped under suspension, Elijah Ward was, as always, 2 steps ahead. Because that same morning her petition reached over 100,000 military signatures. Anonymous soldiers, veterans, cadets, even foreign officers, all demanding changes to identification, protocol, interagency training, and real-time officer verification for on-duty personnel. It wasn't loud. It was unstoppable. And yet no one had heard from her personally. Until now. At 7:08 p.m., Evan received a plain text email. No greeting, no sign-off. Just, the system doesn't fix itself. It protects itself. Until someone makes it bleed. Attached was a scanned, handwritten letter. Evan opened it slowly, pulse pounding. Trevor Lang, Pentagon Garage, July 2020. Another name, another place, another victim. Evan didn't know if Elijah had sent it. He didn't know who else had access to this kind of detail. But something was clear. Someone had made it their mission to expose every instance the system chose silence over responsibility. The next day, the press caught wind of the Pentagon pattern, a new term for a series of misidentifications, illegal detentions, and racially motivated assumptions made within the same 5-mile radius of D.C. federal buildings. And suddenly, Elijah wasn't a headline anymore. She was the tip of the spear. That evening, Evan sat down at his dining table and pulled out a notebook. He wrote out the names he knew. Raymond Harris, March 2016, falsely detained. Nicole James, June 2017, no charges filed. Elijah Ward, current. He underlined each one. And beside them, he wrote, who recorded it, because someone had. Someone inside, someone watching. But why feed Evan? Why now? Was it redemption they wanted, or was it a warning? He didn't know yet. But the question that had haunted him at the end of Part 4, who's still watching, had grown sharper now. Because whoever it was, they weren't just watching anymore. They were acting. And Evan, he was already in too deep to back out now. The thing about being in too deep is you don't always know it until there's no shore left in sight. Evan Shaw sat in his car for nearly 40 minutes before walking into the Internal Affairs office with the USB drive in his pocket and the printed letter from Trevor Lang, Pentagon Garage, July 2020, folded neatly between his fingers. He didn't know if it was real. He didn't even know if he was being used. But he did know one thing now with certainty. This wasn't just about Barnes. And it wasn't just about Elijah. It was a network of wrought, small acts stacked over time, protected by silence, laziness, or fear. And someone, or some group, was done being quiet. Captain Delgado barely looked surprised when he placed the USB and letter on her desk. She read the name at the top, tapped her pen once, and asked, "You ready to testify under oath if this goes federal?" Evan didn't flinch. Yes. Her eyes met his. "You sure? Because if you start naming names, this won't stop at Barnes. This could touch brass, command, contracts. You understand?" "I understand," he said. She nodded. "Then sit down. We've got work to do." They reviewed the footage, the new clip showing Barnes pulling over a man in July 2020 outside the Pentagon South Annex. Just like before, there was no aggression, no resistance, only escalation. The victim, Trevor Lang, had filed a complaint at the time, which had mysteriously disappeared. The name wasn't in any system now. No log, no incident report, no follow-up. Delgado looked at the screen and whispered, "He got buried." And suddenly, the leak made sense. Someone on the inside, someone with access, was collecting ghosts. The cases no one followed up on. The moments officers dismissed as misunderstandings. They were building a silent archive. Delgado tapped her screen. "I want to know who's sending these. I want to know how they're pulling internal dashcam data without being flagged." But Evan had a different question. "Why me?" She looked at him. "Because you froze. But you didn't lie. And maybe whoever's behind this is gambling that guilt creates better witnesses than vengeance." Later that afternoon, Barnes showed up at the station. Not to confess. To fight. His attorney had filed a countersuit against the department, claiming defamation, wrongful suspension, and character assassination. In his statement, he said the footage was taken out of context and manipulated by bad faith actors. But what caught everyone off guard was the third line of the complaint. "We have reason to believe Officer Shaw was responsible for disseminating classified department footage without clearance." Evan read it 3 times, stomach dropping further with each word. He wasn't just a witness now. He was the target. Delgado came into the break room minutes later, tossed the complaint folder onto the table. "They're going to try to flip this," she said flatly. "Make you look like the problem. Paint you as unstable, emotionally compromised." Evan stared at her. "What do I do?" She sighed. "You stay calm. You don't engage. And you let the evidence speak." But Evan wasn't sure the evidence would be enough anymore. Because whoever had been leaking the files, whoever had handed him Trevor Lang's name, was still silent. Still hidden. Still controlling the game. That night, Evan got a call from a blocked number. He almost didn't answer, but something told him to. There was silence on the other end at first. Then a voice, digitally masked, distorted. "You don't know me," it said. "But I know what you've done. I know what you're trying to do. And I know why it matters." Evan sat up straight. "Who are you?" No answer. Only, "There are more names, more footage. But I need to know you're not going to fold." "I'm not." The voice paused. Then, "Good. Because the next one was an officer." Evan blinked. "Wait, a cop. An off-duty black female officer, cuffed outside her own apartment in Crystal City, January 2021. The same pattern. Was it Barnes' number worse? His old partner, Sergeant Donahue. The footage is buried under a private contractor archive. You'll never get it through official channels." Evan's throat tightened. "Then, how do I—" "I'll send it. But this time, you don't just share it with Delgado." "What do you mean?" The voice dropped quiet and sharp. "This time, you take it public." Click. The line went dead. Evan sat there, hands still on the phone, heartbeat in his ears. And somewhere not far from where he sat, someone was waiting to see what he'd do next. Because the fight had changed. It wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about everyone the system pretended not to see. And this time, silence wasn't protection. It was proof. Now the question wasn't who had the footage. It was what would Evan do with it? Once the whole country was watching, Evan didn't sleep that night. He sat on his balcony with a blanket around his shoulders and the encrypted flash drive burning a hole in his hoodie pocket, like a truth he couldn't unhear. The distorted voice echoed in his head. This time, you take it public. It wasn't just a threat. It was a test. And he knew that whoever sent the footage wasn't bluffing. At 3:17 a.m., he plugged the drive into a clean, offline laptop he bought 2 hours earlier from a 24-hour pawn shop. No personal logins, no traceable connections, just him, the screen, and whatever waited inside. The video was short, just under 4 minutes, but it was enough. It showed a black female officer in plainclothes badge on her hip, groceries in her hand, approaching her apartment complex in Crystal City. A man followed behind her, white, tall, bald. A badge flashed in his hand, but the audio didn't pick it up. Then suddenly, the off-duty cop was on the ground, face down, wrist pinned, bag of groceries spilled. Her ID clearly visible in the scattered mess. She was screaming her rank, her badge number, her address. None of it mattered. The man pinning her down, Sergeant Donahue, kept shouting, "Stop resisting," into the silence. The worst part. The body cam footage came from her own vest, and it had been cut from the official record. Evan closed the laptop slowly. His hands were shaking again. At 6:00 a.m., he stood outside a tiny studio in Columbia Heights, where a friend from his academy days now hosted a local podcast focused on law enforcement reform. A niche show, small audience, but real, human, and most importantly, independent. He brought the footage. He didn't name names, not yet. He didn't talk about Barnes, or Elijah, or even the voice on the phone. He just told the truth, about the fear, about the freezing, about watching someone do everything right, everything, and still end up cuffed, violated, dismissed. The episode aired less than 12 hours later, under the title, "The Things We Pretend Not to See." By the next morning, it had 1.4 million views. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was quiet. Because Evan didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke like a man who finally knew how it felt to be seen. And then, something strange started happening. Other officers began emailing the podcast. Private DMs, untraceable messages. Some had nothing but screenshots. Others had years of quietly archived footage. One message simply read, "We thought no one would believe us. Thank you." The dam had cracked, and whoever had been leaking footage, they didn't stop. Over the next 72 hours, 5 new clips surfaced, each one harder to watch than the last. A retired colonel detained outside his own VA center. A pregnant Navy veteran handcuffed for asking directions at night. A Muslim Army major interrogated on his front lawn. Each clip time-stamped. Each file traced back to one jurisdiction, Arlington County. And then came the first press conference. Not from Elijah, not from the Pentagon, but from the Chief of Police. A carefully worded statement about deep concerns, ongoing reviews, and a new third-party ethics commission. It was the right move. But it came too late. Because Elijah Ward, quiet, strategic, surgical, Elijah finally broke her silence. And it wasn't with a speech or a press tour. It was a one-page op-ed in The Atlantic. The headline read, "I followed every rule, and still it wasn't enough." In it she wrote, "I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't want revenge. I wanted procedure. What happened to me wasn't personal. It was structural. And the only reason I got out of it was because I had a badge, a title, and a watch that screamed louder than my voice ever could. But I am not the exception. I'm the one who happened to have proof. This isn't about me. This is about what happens when the silence we're trained to maintain starts costing lives." By the time Evan finished reading it, his inbox had 27 new messages. One stood out. It had no subject, no greeting, just a single line. "She wasn't the first, and you haven't met the last." Underneath a link. When he clicked it, the page opened to a photo. Grainy, dated, Elijah, and another woman standing next to her in uniform. Caption Langley, 2013. Unreported incident. The woman's name was redacted. But Evan knew. This wasn't a postscript. It was the beginning of something else. Because somewhere beneath the surface of silence and shields, more voices were waiting. And Evan. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Barnes. Not of lawsuits. Not of what it might cost. Because once you choose to see, you don't get to unsee. And when the system is built on who gets ignored, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen. This story was never just about one man, or one mistake, or even one department. It was about the slow, invisible cost of silence, and the courage it takes to break it. If this story moved, you share it, discuss it, and subscribe to our channel. Because the next Elijah might not have a badge, might not have a smartwatch, might not get the chance to speak. But you do.